afternoon. I'm Victoria Marshall with the latest news from the Washington Watch News Desk. Yesterday, President Joe Biden gave a speech at the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library in Austin, Texas, in honor of the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act and to message on his proposed reforms to the Supreme Court.
The court's being used to weaponize an extreme and unchecked agenda. This decision is a total affront to the basic expectations we have for those who wield the power in this nation. On top of its extreme decisions, the court is mired in a crisis of ethics. These scandals involving the justices have caused public opinion to question the court's fairness and independence that are essential.
Biden's proposed changes include a new code of ethics for the justices and term limits, and a constitutional amendment stripping presidents of their presidential immunity. Now, these reforms are meant to target the conservative majority on the high court, especially Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, as well as former President Donald Trump. Now, turning our attention to the 2024 election, Transportation Secretary and potential Democratic VP contender Pete Buttigieg just said the quiet part out loud when it comes to abortion. In a Zoom call and Harris campaign fundraiser titled White Dudes for Harris, Buttigieg talked about how abortion benefits men too.
I'm so glad she has made freedom the theme of her campaign, because I think in so many ways that's what's at stake. And yes, women's freedom is Exhibit A after Donald Trump demolished the right to choose. But of course, men are also more free in a country where we have a president who stands up for things like access to abortion care. Men are more free.
And in related election news, Democrats and the Kamala Harris campaign can't find anything wrong with Donald Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, so they've resorted to calling him weird.
Some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
These guys are just weird. That's who they are.
As weird and creepy as J.D. Vance.
Super weird idea from J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's quite weird.
They're just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
That stuff is weird. They come across weird, and then they start being weird. Yeah, they're weird.
Being a really weird.
He's such a weirdo.
Donald Trump and his weirdo running mate are weird. Deeply and profoundly weird.
They are weird.
These Republicans just being weird.
Yes, a happily married father of 3 who grew up with nothing and ascended to federal office is weird. Is this seriously Democrats' best line of attack?
This is a man whose platform reflects where the vast, moderate middle of America is at, okay? That is why they have to smear him as a fascist or as weird, because the Democrats no longer speak to where the average American is at. And so they have to obfuscate that because they think, just like Kaylee said, they think that average Americans are weird, right? That's who Donald Trump is speaking to.
And in international news, protests have erupted across the socialist country of Venezuela after President Nicolas Maduro claimed victory in what many believe was a fraudulent election. Opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez claims that he obtained over 70% of the vote, yet the National Electoral Council declared Maduro the winner of Sunday's election, despite leaked polling showing overwhelming support for Gonzalez. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said the Biden administration has serious concerns about the results and insisted that they do not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. Maduro's re-election could be a major boon to Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, as the ensuing political unrest could lead to waves of political refugees crossing the southern border, something Americans are not happy about. And those are today's headlines. I'm Victoria Marshall. For more news and commentary, be sure to check out the Washington Stand at WashingtonStand.com. Up next is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We'll see you tomorrow with more news.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins starts now.
The court's being used to weaponize an extreme and unchecked agenda. This decision is a total affront to the basic expectations we have for those who wield the power in this nation.
That was President Joe Biden laying out the Democrats' court-packing plan 2.0. Welcome to this Tuesday edition of Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host. President Joe Biden traveled to Austin, Texas yesterday to the Lyndon B. Johnson Library to lay out a sweeping attack on judicial independence. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the president's plan to limit the terms of justices and his proposed Supreme Court ethics plan is dead on arrival. We'll talk with Tennessee Congressman Chuck Fleischmann in just a moment. Speaking of the court, in June of 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court, of which Justice Ginsburg was still a member, issued a landmark ruling pertaining to employment law, Bostock versus Clayton County. Now, the issue at hand surrounded transgender employees who changed their gender appearance after they were hired. The court's 6-3 ruling opened yet another front in the attack on religious freedom, and this week, the ACLU of Virginia advanced that attack, filing a lawsuit against Liberty University for violating Title VII of the Civil Rights Employment Act. We'll look at the facts of the case when we're joined by Stephanie Taub of First Liberty Institute. Also, on Monday night, there was an online rally for Kamala Harris. White Dudes for Harris. On the video rally that organizers said swelled to over 200,000, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a potential vice presidential pick, said he celebrated Harris's pro-abortion focus because it not only gave women more freedom, but men too.
Of course, men are also more free in a country where we have a president who stands up for things like access to abortion care. Men are more free when the leader of the free world and the leader of this country supports access to birth control and to IVF. And certainly men like me and my husband are more free when we have a president who supports our freedom to get married to who we love.
Men are more free when women can get abortions? Maybe this should have been irresponsible white dudes for Harris. We're going to talk about it. As magicians are known for their sleight of hand, Democrats in Congress are known for their sleight of words.
45 days after Joe Biden took the oath of office and I became majority leader, Senate Democrats passed a major expansion of the child tax credit, one of the signature policies of the American Rescue Plan. Every single Republican, down to the last member, voted against this bill.
That was Democrat Senate Leader Chuck Schumer claiming Republicans have not supported children via the child tax credit. Well, I can say emphatically that is not true. The child tax credit was a policy idea that was advanced by the Family Research Council back in the 90s, which we have consistently supported, which has enjoyed vast Republican support and Democrat support. However, as it originated, it was pro-family and it was pro-responsibility. That is not what Mr. Schumer and the gang are advocating. We're going to talk about the difference with Robert Rector, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Health and Welfare Policy at the Heritage Foundation. The website, TonyPerkins.com. Also, if you have not yet downloaded the Stand Firm app, I encourage you to do so. And I want to thank the hundreds of you who voiced your support for Israel in signing the petition calling upon all presidential candidates to stand with Israel. Now, if you'd like to sign it, it's not too late. Simply text the word support to 67742. That's support to 67742. And we are going to deliver those to all of the presidential campaigns, the major three campaigns, encouraging them to stand with Israel. All right, President Biden, he traveled to Texas yesterday to deliver an election year speech calling for radical changes to the U.S. Supreme Court. Not since FDR have we seen something like this. It includes term limits for court justices. The president's address shows both his efforts to delegitimize the current court as well as his call for stacking future courts with loyal partisans of the left. Does this reveal how the left's entire agenda remains dependent on the courts. Joining me now to discuss this, Congressman Chuck Fleischmann. He serves on the House Appropriations Committee and the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, represents the 3rd Congressional District of Tennessee. Congressman Fleischmann, welcome back to Washington Watch. It's always good to see you.
Tony, good evening. Thank you. A privilege to be with you, sir.
So, Congressman, let me ask you this. For decades, the left has relied on the court to impose their agenda on Americans. But now that the court is abiding by the Constitution as opposed to bending the Constitution, the current president, says it has to change.
Well, I'm outraged. As you know, Tony, for years, the left engaged in what we call judicial activism. Conservative judges and constitutionalists believe in strict construction, looking at the document and interpreting it as it is, looking at a statute and interpreting it as it is. What the left did, and of course the radical left did this in Roe versus Wade and other things, they tried to put their radical left-wing agenda and expand that. Since they've lost that ability, now they want to change the rules. Plain and simple, when the left loses by the rules they put in place, they try to change the rules. In a word, it's cheating.
I see two things at play here, Congressman. One, you just described. It is an acknowledgement that they have to change the rules when it doesn't go their way, and they've relied on the courts for over a half a century to implement or impose their policy ideas that they can't get through the legislative process. But is this not really just a political stunt in an election year to try to energize their base with this attack on the court?
Well, Tony, you're absolutely right. It's a political stunt, but it's such a weak political stunt. It doesn't take someone with a PhD in political science to realize that this has absolutely no chance of passing, has no chance of getting any traction. The House, the Senate, they won't touch it. It will go absolutely nowhere. This is Joe Biden in a very weak attempt, reaching out, trying to message something about the court, but give him an F for effort and give him an F for results. No way.
Well, as you said, dead on arrival, the House Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday saying that this would be dead on arrival in the House. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere in the House, unlikely in the Senate. And this requires a constitutional amendment. I mean, this is not something that can even be changed by Congress. It has to be sent from Congress to the states. I mean, I do think it lays bare their philosophy of relying on the court, and they're having a temper tantrum of sorts. But I can't see beyond just the political staging as they go into this presidential election where they're trying to gin up their base.
That's exactly what it is. And Tony, unfortunately, this is a desperate administration. This is a president who is suffering from a lot of different, very apparent maladies. He's not going to run for re-election. They're going to try to pull out every left-wing tool in their left-wing toolbox. But this is not even a good effort. It's very weak. It's pathetic, really, when you think about it. And our founding fathers gave us a great Constitution with an ability, a built-in ability to amend the Constitution. Americans never take that lightly when we've amended the Constitution, but this has absolutely no chance whatsoever. It's a swing and a miss.
The president, in an opinion piece in the Washington Post, he said, "What is happening now is not normal, and it undermines the public's confidence in court decisions, including those impacting personal freedom. We stand in the breach." Of course, his comments about personal freedom is abortion. And again, it appears as long as the court is bending or breaching the Constitution as opposed to yielding to it, it's okay. But once the court begins to work within the confines of the Constitution, as you laid out, a textualist, a strict constructionist, they have a problem with that. They want activists on the courts. And that's a big difference between the two parties, is it not?
You're absolutely right. And I can say this, they want left-wing activism, not only in the economic realm, but in the social realm. That's their ethos, that's their desire. They work all three branches of government, including the executive branch, with their executive orders from Biden and radical left-wing presidents that hurt the country. When they can't get it through the legislative process where it belongs, they'll try the executive branch, and then they will try the courts. When they're not succeeding there, they'll try to change the rules. What we have to realize, Tony, is that as conservatives, as constitutionalists, we have got to make sure that we never let them win at this. Stick to the rule of law, respect the Constitution, and most importantly, respect what the Constitution does, giving us three independent branches of government that should be able to govern themselves. The United States Supreme Court wants an ethics rule. They should be able to put in their own ethics rules. The House and Senate shouldn't do it. Definitely the White House should not do it. I think it would be a good idea for them to do it, but let them do that on their own volition in their own lane constitutionally.
You know, I think that's an extremely important point when you talk about the Constitution. We've got a Constitution. I believe the founders, when they put it together, were inspired. It has worked for nearly 250 years. And you look back on it, and there are exceptions to this, but many times the amending of the Constitution led to unintended consequences. And so I think we should approach that, even as the threshold is very high, we should approach that very, very carefully. Because that is the agreement. The Constitution is the agreement by which the people agree to be governed by their officials, and that's why it's so important we keep it in place. Congressman Fleischman, I'll ask you, switching gears here, we just got about a minute and a half left. Congress is on recess for the month of August back in their districts. You're on the Appropriations Committee. What do you anticipate when Congress comes back in September? Will you turn back to the appropriations bills to get those out before the end of the year?
Well, fortunately, Tony, we've passed 7 of the 12 bills. There are 5 left. There's a few that actually have chance of passage. But with the fiscal year ending on September the 30th, we want to make sure that we avoid a government shutdown. So we'll probably be looking at some form of a very short-term continuing resolution into the lame duck. The Senate, the upper chamber, is working this week in an attempt to try to at least pass appropriation bills out of committee. They're behind us, so the chance of actually sitting down for a conference in September with the Senate is next to nil.
Yeah. Well, they don't want that because that would be a responsible way of funding government, which they've avoided for a long time. Congressman Fleischman, I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Tony, God bless you and yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Chuck Fleischman from Tennessee. All right, when we come back, the ACLU of Virginia announced it will sue my alma mater, Liberty University, for firing an IT help desk employee who, after becoming an employee, became transgender. Was this a setup? And what rights do religious organizations have when it comes to the religious ethic, statements of faith? We're going to talk about that next here on Washington Watch. Don't go away.
Join us October 3rd through the 6th as we gather with spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives from across America at the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit in Washington, D.C. We'll pray for our nation, engage in government and culture, and stand for biblical truth alongside Christian leaders, worldview experts, and government officials. We'll discuss important issues like the sanctity of life, religious freedom, protecting students, strengthening families, praying for our nation, and how you can impact America's future from a biblical worldview. Our nation stands at a critical juncture, and we must ensure that the issues impacting faith, family, and freedom are understood and advanced. Register by July 31st and receive a $70 discount off admission. Register now at PrayVoteStand.org. That's PrayVoteStand.org.
Hello, I'm Jody Heiss, president of FRC Action. Here in America, we thank God for the right to vote. and we can all agree on the importance of this upcoming election. Many of us want to support candidates who share our values, but we're not comfortable supporting the big national political organizations. Well, we have a solution for supporting candidates through FRC Action's Faith, Family, and Freedom Fund. Being a super PAC, it allows for unlimited individual and corporate donations, so we can endorse and fund campaigns for people who share our values. By giving to this fund, we're able to pull all of our contributions together and support and endorse like-minded candidates. That's how we move the needle. So let's be the best stewards possible and get the most out of our political contributions by uniting our efforts. For more information or to contribute, visit faithfamilyfreedomfund.org. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Sometimes the headlines are overwhelming, and it feels like we're all alone and there is nothing we can do. That is exactly what the enemy wants us to believe. Reading through the Bible, there are many things that are counterintuitive. One of them is that God never uses a majority. It is always a minority devoted to the truth. Here at Family Research Council, we are grateful to stand side by side with other believers for the truth. And as a result, God is making a difference. When you partner with us, you are joining with Christians around the nation in standing together for the truth of God's Word, supplying pastors and parents and school boards with training and resources to stand up against the indoctrination of our children. Together, with God's help, we can preserve freedom for the next generation. Go to frc.org and become a STAND member today.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday. Be sure and download the Stand Firm app, and you can watch Washington Watch right there on your smartphone. You can also get our daily devotional, Stand on the Word, as well as our news feed, the Washington Stand. Go to the App Store, download the Stand Firm app. Last week, Liberty University dismissed a male employee hired to work at their IT help desk after he notified the university that he now identifies as a transgender woman and plans to change his name to Eleanor Zinsky. Now, this week, the ACLU of Virginia and a Virginia law firm filed a lawsuit on behalf of Zinsky, claiming the university violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The lawsuit seeks compensation and punitive damages on behalf of Zinsky, as well as a declaratory relief that Liberty University's policy violates Title VII. Now, this looks like a setup to me because of the court's decision in Bostock, which came in June of 2020, which was it was actually a couple of cases combined into one. One was a nursing home, a funeral home, in which a male employee changed over to female, and of course it made people uncomfortable, and the employer said, look, can't do this, was not how we hired you. Well, the court ruled against that funeral home in that case, but we're now talking about religious institutions. Will religious institutions be forced to violate their authentically held, biblically based beliefs? Joining me now to discuss this is First Liberty Institute Senior Counsel Stephanie Taub. Stephanie, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about this very important issue.
Well, it's extremely important because this will have an effect on religious institutions across the country. Liberty University has a doctrinal statement that names denial of birth sex by self-identification with a different gender as a sinful act prohibited by God. Now, how does federal law address religious organizations and their beliefs? Do they have to sacrifice their religious convictions on the altar of political correctness?
They absolutely should not be forced to do that. And fortunately, the law gives a couple of very strong lines of defense for religious organizations. The first one is in the Constitution. And fortunately, we've had a couple of very good decisions from the United States Supreme Court that protects religious schools and their right to hire so-called, ministers or people that are responsible for teaching the faith to the next generation as a part of their religious school. And there's also protections in federal employment discrimination law itself, which gives protections for religious employers to make employment decisions based on religion. But what we see here is we see radical organizations like the ACLU that are trying to chip away at the right of religious schools, and especially Christian schools, and their right to actually remain a community of faith that are dedicated to their doctrinal principles.
So let me ask you this, Stephanie. So in previous court cases, certain positions were recognized as being held to, like ministers and those that, as you mentioned, teachers and others. But when you're creating a community and you're trying to create a community based upon biblical truth, anyone that you'd allow in there to do something that was 180 degrees removed from that teaching could be problematic for the entire institution, could it not?
Absolutely. What makes a Christian school is its ability to have Christians who adhere to the same doctrinal statements, who are able to work together in a community to achieve a shared mission. And what you have here with these kinds of lawsuits is the ACLU trying to force Christian schools to accept and maintain employees who are acting out of step with those doctrinal statements, who are contradicting them, and this has the potential to interfere with the religious schools and their ability to effectively fulfill their religious missions.
So, Stephanie, what if my suspicions are correct, that you had an individual that was kind of put up to this and went in one way, and then once they got on the inside said, hey, I'm not really a man, I'm identifying as a woman. I mean, isn't there some type of protection against institutions for those that are trying to set them up and do this surreptitiously?
Well, if it is disingenuous, that's certainly a defense that I would imagine would be raised. And I think institutions like Liberty University require all of their employees to sincerely sign the doctrinal statement or agree to it. And if it was not agreed to in good faith, that would certainly be a very good defense for this organization.
Our Lady of Guadalupe School was a court case that actually kind of broadened the areas that are protected by religious positions rather, that are protected. I think the left's a little bit concerned by that. You also add to that RFRA protections, I think, apply as well. So I would think that Liberty has a pretty good foundation from which to argue that their position is reasonable.
Yes, I would think so. But I think that some of these issues, especially the interpretation of the statutory protections, are ones that the Supreme Court is going to need to clarify in the not too distant future. So we've seen very good cases protecting religious schools and teachers at those religious schools in the Our Lady of Guadalupe case. But some of these cases, we've seen courts go the wrong way and not protect religious organizations, especially when it comes to the statutory rights of these schools. So we'll be keeping an eye out for those at First Liberty, and I know there's a lot of good organizations that are doing work in this area. Fighting to protect religious liberty for these schools is just so important in the face of these increasing attacks.
So these court cases that we're up against a break, but these court decisions like Bostock creates a whole new area of conflict within federal law. And then it's going to eventually, it has to come back to the court for them to clarify and address those issues that they created by their own decision, right?
Yes, absolutely. So that's one problem when courts are expanding what a civil rights legislation that was passed in 1964 actually means, and suddenly it means something totally different. And so there's created a lot of open questions, especially when it comes to the intersection of the Bostock decision and religious liberty. So we're continuing to see those pop up, and we're continuing to fight for religious liberty.
Well, we appreciate all that you do at First Liberty Institute. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, stick around. We're coming back with more Washington Watch on the other side of the break.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday afternoon. Right, last night there was a online rally for Vice President Harris. It was white dudes for Harris. I wasn't there. There was about 200,000, apparently, according to organizers. It's very interesting. The Democratic Party doubling down on their identity politics. I mean, they've got all these different groups for Harris, all based upon their identity politics. That's fine. That's who they are. They're embracing who they are and what they stand for. But I want to play a clip of the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Now, he was the former mayor up in Indiana. He's married to another man. He has, I think they adopted a kid or somehow they got a baby. So I'm going to play this clip. He joined the call last night, and this is in part what he had to say, clip 9.
I'm so glad she has made freedom the theme of her campaign, because I think in so many ways that's what's at stake. And yes, women's freedom is Exhibit A after Donald Trump demolished the right to choose. But of course, men are also more free in a country where we have a president who stands up for things like access to abortion care. Men are more free when the leader of the free world and the leader of this country supports access to birth control and to IVF. And certainly men like me and my husband are more free when we have a president who supports our freedom to get married to who we love.
All right, did you catch that? All right, men are more free because we have a president and we have a presidential candidate who is all about abortion. When women, of course, they use the term freedom, freedom to kill your child, freedom for an abortion, that's what they're talking about. That because of women having access to abortion and birth control, men are free. Free of what? Responsibility? Free to actually have to answer for their actions? I mean, think about that. I mean, this is the Secretary of Transportation. What he's talking about is creating a society, which we're already seeing, that's a train wreck. You should know a little bit about that. But the fact that we would have someone at the highest level saying men are free because women can get abortions, That's, well, it's troubling when you see where we're at. But what I want you to see in this, and I want you to watch this over the next 98 days of this presidential campaign, is that the left is not running away from who they are. They support, they are focused upon abortion until the moment of birth at taxpayer expense. Now, there's a few other things, but this is going to be the number one issue. Every time Kamala Harris opens her mouth, it is about talking about reproductive freedom, freedoms under attack. As what Joe Biden was talking about last night about the court. They were fine when the court imposed abortion on the nation. They were fine when the court imposed same-sex marriage on the nation, even though half the states had passed marriage amendments. They were fine with that. But they were not fine when the court retraced its steps and repented of causing nearly 62 million babies to be killed in this country since Roe v. Wade back in 1973. But here's the reality. That's who they are. They're doubling down on it, and they're running on it. And they're proud of it. Now, I'll have to say I'm concerned that the Republican Party, that has been historically known as pro-life, at least for the last 4 decades, is not proud, apparently, of their position of life. They've removed it from the party platform, and they've gone silent. I mean, how do you counter a lie? How do you counter the lies of the left? You certainly don't do it by silence. When you align with biblical truth, the fact that every human being is created in the image of God, therefore worthy to be protected under our laws and welcomed into the world, you're moving closer into alignment with biblical truth and therefore the blessing of God. I mean, one of the reasons I think our nation is suffering from the lawlessness, the violence, is because we've moved further and further from that truth. And we've got one party that is hell-bent on advancing a demonic, destructive agenda. We need to have a counterbalance. And there's no wink and a nod. Either you're for it or you're against it. Either you're going to support life or you're not. And I think we're at a critical juncture. And I think we need to support candidates, support parties that will support the sanctity of human life. The left is not ashamed. They are not ashamed of what they support. We need to call upon those candidates we support to be just as proud to stand for the sanctity of human life. All right, after the break, we're going to talk about child tax credit. Senate Democrats are looking to make a campaign issue on cutting taxes for parents of children. Or is there more to this political messaging? What do they really mean by supporting children? When you watch their lips, you need to be watching their feet and their hands in terms of what they're creating. All things are not equal in our nation's capital. Don't go away. More Washington Watch straight ahead.
Download the new Stand Firm app for Apple and Android phones today and join a wonderful community of fellow believers. We've created a special place for you to access news from a biblical perspective, read and listen to daily devotionals, pray for current events, and more. Share the Stand Firm app with your friends, family, and church members, and stand firm everywhere you go.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Jesus said in John 15, "These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full." In 2024, in these divided and uncertain times, how can this be possible? By abiding in Him through His Word. At Family Research Council, we want to help you do that, which is the reason for the Stand on the Word Bible reading plan. In just 10 to 15 minutes each day, you will have read the entire Bible in just 2 years. But more importantly, you will be abiding in Him daily. Find our Bible reading plan at frc.org/Bible. And join Tony Perkins each weekday for a 10-minute devotional inspired by the daily reading and designed to encourage you on this journey through the Bible. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And remember, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever.
This is Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Good to have you with us. Again, if you've not yet signed the pledge, the petition of support for Israel, calling upon presidential candidates to stand with Israel, I encourage you to text the word support to 67742. Several thousand folks have texted that in, and we're going to be delivering those, but there's still time. So text the word support to 67742. We need to stand with our ally Israel. It's one of those defining issues, and we're seeing increasingly, unfortunately, this is becoming a partisan issue, but we need to make sure we stand with Israel. Text the word support to 67742. Our word for today comes from Psalm 89. Lord, where are your former loving kindnesses, which you swore to David in your truth? Remember, Lord, the reproaches of your servant, how I bear in my bosom the reproach of all the many peoples, with which your enemies have reproached, O Lord, with which they have reproached the footsteps of your anointed. Well, like the children of Israel, our choices and disobedience, well, it often clouds the rays of God's sunshine and blessing upon our lives. But His promises are still there, and they're sure. When it feels as if God does not hear, and the silence of the moment suggests God is not answering, don't stop praying. Don't stop pleading for His mercy based upon who He is, upon His covenant, the promises that He has made. Keep standing in anticipation of the answer based upon the very foundation of His throne, which is righteousness and justice. As mercy and truth, Jesus intercedes for you at the throne of the Father. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, text Bible to 67742. That's Bible to 67742, and I invite you to join us on this daily journey. Again, text Bible to 67742. Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer plans to bring the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act to the floor for a procedural vote this week, but is this just another show vote? Also, the $79 billion package is, well, it's not quite as pro-family as some would like to see. Joining me now to talk about this, Chris Gasik, Senior Fellow for Regulatory Studies here at the Family Research Council. Chris, welcome to Washington Watch.
It's good to be with you, Tony.
So the topic of child tax credit and relief for families, something that is very near and dear to the Family Research Council, something that we really spearheaded back in the 90s, the child tax credit. But these terms are not all equal. the left has a different version. Let's talk about that.
Well, essentially what we're involved in, or what we're interested in doing, is providing a basis by which lower income families can be given credits or incentives to work and provide credits to families for children. And on their side, everything is about converting everything to more welfare and increasing the reach and scope of the traditional welfare payment system, which is never what this program has been about.
So instead of creating responsibility, it creates dependence.
Exactly. I think that this is what you're kind of seeing happening, if this is allowed to go forward, is that you would have the opposite of the incentive structure for which all of these great programs that we were involved in going back to for decades, right? They would be undermined. And so this is not a direction in which the Republican members of the House or the Senate should go down.
Right. So, I mean, what they're not saying is that more than 90% of the benefits in this Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act comes from new welfare cash payments, not tax cuts for working families.
Exactly, and I think in the course of your career, you've had a lot of experience with this, so you must have a lot of. It must be disappointing to sort of see how this is trending. I don't know if this just sort of, the Democrats, I don't think they've ever really been, super happy about it, but I don't know if this is something that has sort of clawed its way into the law over, after the COVID debacle, or, it's an interesting set of problems, right?
Yeah. Chris, thanks so much. I'm going to bring in Robert Rector from Heritage. I appreciate you joining us, Chris, and giving us an update. All right.
Good to see you.
Joining me now to help break this down further is Robert Rector. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for Health and Welfare Policy at the Heritage Foundation, and he joins us by phone. Robert, welcome to Washington Watch. Robert, are you with us? All right. Robert, are you there? Oh. Robert? I think we lost. Let's bring Chris back in, and we'll continue that conversation until we get Robert back on the line. So, Chris, the timing of this makes it also suspect, because during this summer, since I think the reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration, there's been nothing but show votes on the Senate floor, most of them dealing with abortion and other quote-unquote reproductive freedom measures.
Well, I think you're right about this. I mean, and there's something very interesting about this, something that we've talked about a little bit, internally at FRC, but now that you mention it, I hadn't really put it together, but one of the things that's been going on in the sort of the macro political debate after the Republican convention is that, J.D. Vance has been involved in this big fight with Kamala Harris over, saying that the Democrat Party is not a family-friendly policy, and it's an anti-natalist policy, right? It's opposed to child policies, and it's opposed to people having children. So I guess, it really would, what you said makes a lot of sense, because maybe they're rolling this thing out as a way to counter the charge, which is true about their party, that they're really not, that they're a party that has a different kind of agenda, this sort of the agenda of the sort of the feminist sexual revolution, right? And he really sort of laid into them with a lot of energy. And there was a big exchange about that, and he actually raised this issue of the child tax credit. I think he was kind of saying that they seem to be backing away from it. So maybe after that occurred, or after some statement she made, they had to back her up.
So how can you be the party of unrestricted abortion up to the moment of birth at taxpayer expense, and then turn around and say you're pro-child?
Well, exactly. I mean, this is exactly the problem, and I think Look, this whole problem of the birth dearth and the lowing, declining birth rates is a problem that people are recognizing. And I think one of the most famous people, and who sort of mentioned this as a sort of a geopolitical problem and just a problem for all people, but in the United States too, is Elon Musk, right? So this isn't something we're making up, or that this is some fantasy of the social conservative right. And when you have these policies, abortion is the most obvious. Well, it's one of them, right? I mean, another obvious one is this sort of the decline of birth rates that has come along with, the whole sort of anti-natalist, arsenal, right? It's all sorts of contraceptives and sterilization and these sorts of policies, right? And they're not illegal, or they're not all, the same sort of the idea. But the general idea is, that going back to Margaret Sanger is, they don't like kids, right?
Right.
And then so the ultimate consequence of this is that when you sort of divorce this from any kind of long-term consequences and the thinking of individuals making wrong decisions, you have a country like Italy that's basically exterminating itself.
Well, it's just like the comment I played earlier from Pete Buttigieg, that abortion on demand up to the moment of birth at taxpayers' expense, which is their definition of freedom, makes men freer. And I mean, that's their view of this.
Well,
Right,
I mean,
Chris?
this is like, Hugh Hefner was probably smiling in his grave, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the sexual libertines are all over America are like, yeah, go,
But we're
on,
funding
man.
this. We're funding this with our tax dollars, and this is just more of this irresponsibility that we're talking about when Democrats try to couch this as pro-child programs. All right, Chris, I think we've got Robert Rector now. So again, thanks for standing by.
Great talking to you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Chris Gasik, Senior Fellow for Regulatory Studies here at the Family Research Council. Okay, I think we've got Robert Rector now by phone. As I mentioned, he's Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Health and Welfare Policy at the Heritage Foundation and a longtime expert on family policy. Robert, do we have you now?
Yes, you do.
All right, thanks so much for joining us. All right, let's talk about the child tax credit passed back in 1997. The groups like Family Research Council helped pushing that. That's not the same thing we're hearing today when they talk about helping families, is it?
No. In fact, that 1997 credit was designed by myself with the coalition of Christian Coalition, FRC. We all joined together. But that was about tax relief for families with kids. This is not. With this bill, they say it's tax relief, but 91% of the expenditure is for families that do not pay or owe any income tax. It's simply a welfare payment, and they camouflage it. They lie about it, and they say, oh, it's tax relief. It's not intended to be tax relief. It's a cash grant. Primarily about 75–80% of it goes to single-parent families. It's a subsidy system for single-parent families. And the intention of this is to kind of reverse welfare reform from the 1990s, which said, look, we are not going to deny people aid. We're not going to put people on the street, but we expect people who are able-bodied and get assistance, whether it's cash, food, housing, or medical care, from the government. They ought to be required to do something to support themselves and their families. This is a way of getting around that and talking about it in a completely misleading way that, oh, this is about tax relief. And unfortunately, the Republicans have bought into this deception and this lie in the House so far. It's a terrible thing, but it reverses welfare reform, and it's the goal. I mean, conservatives say they understand, oh, the left and Karl Marx, he wanted to abolish private property. This is all about economics. No, because right there in the Communist Manifesto, the third item of what needs to be abolished, marriage needs to be abolished.
Right.
This is a welfare system that not only subsidizes single parenthood and non-marital birth, but it imposes substantial penalties, dramatic financial penalties on low-income parents who choose to marry. A family where maybe the father makes $25,000 a year, the mom makes, say, $20,000, as long as they don't marry and he's off the books, she gets tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars from the government. As soon as they marry, they can lose up to $20,000 a year in welfare payments. So we've deliberately made marriage economically irrational for about 40% of the population.
But that was already the case in so many other programs. This was to offset this. When you go back to the origins of the child tax credit, was to encourage family formation and help parents feel well, it didn't completely offset the cost, but we needed more children.
More children and more children within the context of marriage. That was the idea of welfare reform. And welfare reform was very successful. At the time that welfare reform was passed, 1 in 10 children in the United States was born to an unmarried teenage girl, 17 or younger. 1 in 10. And it was going up. And even the Washington Post was upset about this. But they said there's no solution. As soon as we put welfare reform in effect that said, you're not going to get a lifetime of welfare from the welfare system, that immediately dropped, and that rate has dropped down close to zero. Okay. Now that must be a dramatic increase in abortion. No, abortions among these young women also fell by the same rate. Welfare reform not only reduced non-marital childbearing, but it reduced non-marital pregnancy as well. And as a result of that, both the number of non-marital births, but also non-marital abortions, has gone down dramatically after welfare reform.
So this reverses
as a result of that reduction, there are 10 million fewer abortions that have occurred since welfare reform. All of this will reverse that.
Yeah.
It's intended to.
Intended to.
Yep. It's clearly the goal. Not for every. I mean, some of the left just likes to redistribute income because it's cuddly and it's kind and it's nice, and it's fuzzy thinking. But the hard left really buys into what Marx and Engels said, that in order to produce utopia, you not only have to get rid of private property and all that stuff that economic conservatives, but you have to get rid of the married family. Engels is very, very clear about that.
And of course, organized religion.
What you want is non-married families. The parents don't marry. Kids are raised in government daycare. It's exactly what he says, and
so they can
exactly
program
what they
them.
Want to do.
They can indoctrinate them in those government schools.
Yep.
In those formative years between when a worldview is shaped between 15 months and 13 years.
Yeah. But I would say, in contrary to what the previous guest was saying, men don't win from this, okay? Because what you're doing to men is you're robbing them of their role as a father and a breadwinner.
Oh, absolutely.
You're pushing them out of the household and replacing them with a welfare check. And that has devastating effects on everybody, but on particular the men who lose their role.
But for political power, it works.
It does work. It does. But look at the tragedy for males. If you look at fentanyl overdoses, for example.
Hey, Robert, we're going to have to continue this conversation at another time. We're up against the end of the program, but
sure,
we will do it because I find it fascinating. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Robert Rector at Heritage Foundation, and we will continue this conversation because I think it's fascinating and it's important. But we're out of time for today, so thanks for joining us. And until next time, I leave you once again with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you've taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com.